Hi there, I'm Frank Crenshaw. This is Frank's Plastic Modeling page, and this is my Trumpeter 1/144th scale Seawolf submarine that I just recently completed. When I first bought this kit, I had no idea it was this big. I thought it would be maybe two-thirds this size. But just to give you an idea of how large this model actually is, this is a sweet 1/144 scale Focke-Wulf D9 that I built years ago. It's a little busted up, but it gives a pretty good reference to show you how large this model actually is. These, you could probably put, 15 to 20 of these sweet kits end to end along the hull. That's pretty big. The USS Jimmy Carter's even longer. So this would either be the SSN-21 Seawolf or the SSN-22 Connecticut. Really hard to tell the difference between the two. They have very similar markings as they've switched to a very generalized paint scheme, and they don't actually carry the numbers on the sail anymore like they used to. So I guess to make it harder for intelligence assets of other countries to know what subs wear. But anyway, so this could either be the Connecticut or the Seawolf. What did I do to make this kit really nice? I'm going to focus on construction. The construction really is the story of this model. Without the construction, everything that sits on it would be a waste of time. If I had not taken the time to figure out how to blend the seams, reinforce the fuselage, build outside the instructions, none of this build would really be possible. A few people have asked me to talk about how I painted this, and frankly, I believe that it's because when new people see a well-painted model, they fall in love with what they can see, and that's the paint. And they don't really understand what went into making the model that is then painted. I find painting to be rather easy, so it's not really my focus when I do videos. There's a lot of really good videos on painting out there. Metalev Modeler and Night Shift, both excellent resources for people learning how to do different types of painting. Metalev does all kinds of shading, artistic style painting. Painting is all thinning, air pressure, and knowing how your paint works. One interesting story about the paint on this model, though, is this is Mission Models paint. And it looks really good. But I cannot show this model on the Mission Models website or Facebook page because they banned me. They banned me because I add Future to Mission Models paint to thin it. And apparently that's such a horrible offense to Mission Models that they literally will kick you out of their group if you do that. But this is a trick I learned maybe not many, a while back from a guy in Czechoslovakia, Marian Sion. And he told me that if I added some Future to my Mission Models paint, it would stick like nothing else. And so I did it. And what do you know? It really worked great. I actually made a video about it if you're curious. But Mission Models paint mixed with Future really works great. So if you want some paint advice, that's the best paint advice I can have for you right there. If you use Mission Models, thin it with Future. In addition to the paint, we have aftermarket decals. These are micro scale, Navy font, and 1/72 scale. Now, what makes this interesting is these are all individual numbers. They don't come like this. They're just individual numbers. So one of the challenges of this kit is these numbers, as these depth gauges rise up, the spacing between the numbers increases because the hull's a curve. So for the distance you change here in depth, the distance along the hull of the sub is actually greater than the depth. So down here these things are about a scale foot apart, but up here they're like 2 scale feet apart because of the curve of the hull. I've added that. That's a little detail that no one's really going to care about, but my sub has that. And that was really easy. What I did to do that is I created a template that would show me where the decals would go. and I cut it on my Cameo plotter, placed it on the model, and just put the decals on, and it worked perfect. I mean, this worked really good. I'm really excited how that worked. I did that in the front, but I also did that on the tail. Now, since this is nice and straight, these are literally a foot apart. But the kit markings really for this were really terrible. And as you can see, or maybe you can see, these are really small. So I had to figure out how to put them on individually and keep them straight, which would have been a nightmare to do by eye. So I created a gauge that just lined up everything and, you know, put the decals on. Then I painted the water stain, and notice that there's actually a gauge running down the very front of the fin. And the water stain goes through the same depth. So that was a lot of fun. All possible because I was building outside the box. And when I say outside the box, I'm not talking about contest criteria. I'm talking about not following anyone's rules. I didn't follow Trumpeter's rules. I didn't follow Mission Model's rules. I just followed my own rules. And that's how you get a kit like this built. You gotta understand the construction in order to get to the point where all the fancy paint really makes sense. So that's why the focus of my videos. So if you're wondering why I don't talk a lot about paint, I focus on construction because I feel that is probably one of the most important parts of model building. And that really, because that's the basis of everything below it. Now, if you start off with a Tamiya kit, it's still important, but it's just easier because it's a Tamiya kit. If it's not a Tamiya kit, well, you gotta do more work in construction. Fancy paint is a waste of time if it's sitting on top of a pile of crap. So keep that in mind. One of the other things I did, these little tabs that are on the inside of these bow fins, these plastic tabs, I drilled them out and stuck a telescopic tubing, and then I put a corresponding tube that it fit in all the way across the hull. This lines the bow planes up perfectly, and of course they're not just going to break off if I bump against them. Those little tiny plastic nubs, wherever you see them on any kit, doesn't matter whether it's an airplane or you really ought to consider just replacing them flat out, because how many times have I just touched it, snapped it off, and now you're gluing it on with super glue, and now you got glue spots, and it just is this downward spiral of, oh crap. So telescopic tubing solves that problem like nothing else. Now, one of the details that I did add, well, I guess let's go back to the markings. So in addition to these decals, which turned out pretty good, I also added these arrows, and I'm not sure what their function is on the actual submarine, but they're very visible. I just cut those on a Cameo plotter. That's all I did with that, and put them on, and perfect. But just those decals, just adding those decals made a big difference to this overall look of this model. One of the things that I did do that really I think was probably the biggest change in detail for this kit is this shrouded pump that I created. Now this is a 3D printed part. And inside it is a bronze painted impeller that's slightly green, slightly, you know, it's just washed with a tinge of very pale green paint to represent the sort of look of bronze that's exposed to seawater. It's very convincing. But this pump piece that I created really adds to the overall look of the model and takes it from looking like a toy to actually looking like a scale model. And that was my goal, was for this to not look like a toy. I know it's not going to win in a contest because of, you know, various gaps due to my use of magnets, but I don't actually care about that. Now, one of the other things I added, I 3D printed these tie downs. These tie downs on the kit are not right. They're T-shaped squares, and on the real sub they're these anvil shaped and very oval. And they also are the wrong size on the kit. But I just looking at photographs, I was able to scale them to. These are pretty close. I mean, they may not be exact, but they're pretty darn close to the real ones. Another little detail that Trumpeter missed, and this is obscure, so this detail isn't all that critical. But the hatches on the submarine are flat, and the reason they're flat is so a rescue sub can dock to them in the event of an emergency that they need to evacuate the crew because the sub's grounded to the bottom and can't surface. So they actually have these flat, and they've been this way for a while. And I know the Seawolf was originally produced with them. The problem is Trumpeter engraved these hatches backwards, and so when I put my 3D printed hatches on, I put them on backwards. But the flat spot should actually face towards the front of the sub, and the curve should face towards the rear. I noticed a picture where you can clearly see that that's the case. But anyway, a little minor detail, should you be interested, but I don't really feel like this adds a whole lot to the kit. It's a nice little detail. And if somebody was really looking closely and there was another Trumpeter sub next to it on a contest table or something, then they would say, oh, well, that's different. But otherwise, no one's going to see that. The most visual change to this sub is, of course, the finish. And I've talked a little bit about that. But one of the bigger details that I did add, and in retrospect, I'm really glad I did add it, was this conning tower. And, of course, this conning tower connects with magnets. None of this detail is present on the kit. These hatches, and they're all square. There's a few squares, but they're not accurate. Anyway, this is a much more accurate representation of the access hatches that you see on the side of a Seawolf conning tower. If you also notice the way the beak connects, it's got a bit of a flange to it. The real one does that. The Trumpeter kit doesn't do that. It's just a smooth transition right into the sail. Not a big deal, but just a little thing. I cut these vents, and they're actually rusty, a little rusty, with a little bit of rust trickling down. You can't see it here, but in real life you can see it, and it looks really good. This is some sort of sensor. I'm not exactly sure what it does, but missing on the kit. One of the big changes are the masts, and one of the things I'm really excited about these masts is if you look at the tops of the masts, they match to the curvature of the top of the sail. Because when these things actually retract into the sub, these things are basically flush on the top, and it's a very visible feature that you can see in a close-up picture of a Seawolf transiting. These masts are very accurate, by the way. I was able to scale some based on everything around it, and I'm really pleased with how that turned out. The layout of the top of the sail is much different than what you see in the Trumpeter kit, and this is a far more accurate representation. I had no idea that this is a position called the lookout. There's this open spot here, and then there's this lookout. I was not able to find any detail of the interior of this particular stand, so I don't know what that looks like. I just left it blank. But anyway, that's the sub. It's very large, and I'm going to have to find out how to take pictures of it because it won't fit in my photo booth. So